The buggy came up the road before the mud had fully dried from the last rain, and she knew before it stopped at her gate that whoever was inside had not made a long drive. The horses were groomed. The harness was polished. Nobody who had traveled far came in with polished harness. She was splitting kindling on the side of the house when she heard the wheels slow. She set the hatchet down on the block without burying it, a thing she would not have done 6 months ago, when the yard had been hers alone and there had been no reason to mind sharp edges left within reach of small hands. And she walked around to the front. The boy was on the porch steps, drawing lines in the soft mud with a stick. He looked up when the buggy stopped, the way he always looked up at things that arrived without announcement, quick and assessing, his eyes going first to the horses and then to the people inside. She got to the gate before either of them climbed out. The woman who stepped down first was dressed for town, not for a dooryard. Black coat, good wool, a hat that did not belong in the wind. She was maybe 50, with a face that had been handsome and had decided to stay so through sheer persistence. The man behind her carried a leather case and moved like someone paid to stand close to things that mattered. "I'm looking for the woman who has my nephew," the woman said. She did not say good morning. She did not look at the mud on her shoes. She did not look at the boy either, which told something. A woman who had come for a child ought to look at him first. "He's on the porch," she said. "I know where he is. I've known where he's been all winter." The woman opened the clasp on her purse and took out a folded document. "I'm here to take him home." The boy's stick had gone still. He was watching the horses. She looked at the paper in the woman's gloved hand and did not reach for it. "I have something of my own," she said. "We should talk about that first." The woman's expression did what expressions did when they met a door that ought to have been open. She looked briefly at the man with the case, and the man gave the small professional nod of someone hired to solve problems before they became visible. "There's nothing to talk about," the woman said. "He's family. He belongs with family." She looked at the boy who had gone back to drawing his lines in the mud, slow and deliberate, as if the horses and the people and the document were all weather, present, noted, not yet requiring action. "Come inside," she said, "both of you." She went up the steps without waiting to see if they followed. Behind her, the boy moved over without being asked, making room for her to pass, and as she went through the door, she felt his eyes on her back and understood that he was checking whether she was afraid. She was not afraid. That surprised her less than it once would have. 3 weeks before the buggy came, the snow had stopped meaning anything and started meaning something else. Just water, just cold, just one more thing the ground had to take in before spring arrived and made the accounting. The mud was the proof of it, soft in the middle of the day, hard by nightfall, the yard a different country by morning than it had been by noon. Dr. Yates came on his bay, gelding on a Thursday, which was not his usual day to ride that road, and she saw him from the kitchen window before he reached the property. He had his bag. He always had his bag, but he was carrying it in his left hand instead of his right, and she had known him long enough to know that he switched hands when the bag felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. She went to the door. He did not come up onto the porch. He stood in the yard with his hat on, which also said something, and reached inside his coat for an envelope. It was thick, the seal already broken and repressed, soft at the corners from being handled many times. "He asked me to keep it," he said, "since January, said to bring it when the snow gave." She took it. It was warm from his body, the way things got warm when they had been carried close for a long time. "He knew you'd be by," she said. "He knew I'd be by, and he didn't want you to have this conversation while it was still cold out." The doctor looked past her toward the door. The boy was not visible, but they both knew where he was. He thought spring would make it easier. Did he think that, or did you? The doctor almost smiled. "Probably me." He waited in the yard while she read it. She read it standing in the doorway, the cold working past the hem of her coat, the thin pages going stiff in her hands. She read it once fast and then again slow, the way she read anything she needed to remember exactly. It was not long. He had never been a man who wrote long. But what it said was long in the way that mattered. It named her, not as a caretaker, not as a kindness extended through a hard season. It named her as the person who was to have the raising of his son. His word, raising, the only word he had underlined in the whole of it, and it had been witnessed by two men she recognized, both solid enough that any judge in the county would take their signatures without question. She folded it in thirds and held it in both hands for a moment, looking out at the yard where the mud was already beginning to harden again as the afternoon cooled. "He didn't tell me this," she said. "No," the doctor said, "I don't imagine he did. He let me think it was temporary." "He let you say yes?" Dr. Yates picked up his bag. "I've delivered enough last wishes to know the difference. He knew what you'd do with the whole weight of it if he handed it to you in November." She thought of the boy then, not as he was now, 7 years old, steady, watchful, but as he had been in November when his father had walked him up to her door and set him down like something breakable and precious and said, "Just for the winter, until I'm stronger." Neither of them had believed the until, but the word had made it possible to say yes. The doctor was already turning back toward his horse. "Does his sister know?" she said. "She will. His solicitor is bound to notify her once he files." He settled into the saddle. "She's in Kansas City. She's not the kind of woman who stays in a place she doesn't consider her own." The boy appeared then in the doorway behind her. He had heard none of this, or he had heard all of it, and either way he said nothing. He only looked at the doctor on the horse and then at her face, the way he had learned to read her face the way you read sky, for what it meant about the next few hours. "Go put the kettle on," she said. He went. His boots on the floorboards were a sound she had learned the way she had learned every sound the house made. Which ones meant something, which ones meant he was fine. She went inside and set the letter on the shelf behind the flour tin, where the boy could not reach it, and put her hands in the wash water because they needed something ordinary to do. She had not known him in October. She barely knew him in November, when he came to the gate on a horse that was doing the work out of will rather than strength, the animal's ribs showing through a winter coat that had come in thin. He was not a large man, but he had the particular way of moving that large men sometimes had, deliberate, as if he had decided years ago that rushing things never helped. He did not open the gate. He stood with one hand on it and coughed into the other. She was pulling the last of the winter squash from the kitchen garden, crouched in the cold with her back to the road. She heard the cough before she heard the horse. It was the kind of cough that had been going on long enough to have found its rhythm. She stood. He had taken the handkerchief out before she turned around. He had folded it before she could look at it too long. But the fold itself said what it was hiding. "I need to ask you something," he said. "I was told you might say yes." She did not ask who had told him. She waited. "I have a son," he said. 7. His mother passed 2 years back. He stopped. Started again differently. "I'm not going to be well enough to see him through the winter. I know a man who knows a man, and he said you were someone who could be trusted with something that mattered." She looked at the horse. She looked at the man. She looked down the empty road toward where a child might be waiting somewhere. "Where is he now?" "At the Denbrow place, up the North Fork. I didn't want to bring him until I knew." "Knew what?" "Whether you'd say yes." She looked at him for a long time. A crow passed over, low, not calling. The squash were going soft where they lay on the ground, and she'd need to get them in before the night freeze took them. "Can he do chores?" she said. Something shifted in his face. Not relief. Something quieter than relief. The thing that happens when a man realizes the door is not locked after all. "He can," he said. "He's not afraid of work." "Is he afraid of much?" The man was quiet a moment, honest with it. He was, less now. "He's been alone with me a fair amount this past year." She nodded once. "Bring him on Friday," she said, "and I'll want to see what you can do for the arrangement in writing. Not just spoken. It'll be in writing." He put his hat back on, and he stood there another moment as if there were something else to say, and then he did not say it. He got back on the horse slower than he'd gotten off it, and he rode back down the road toward town, and she stood in the yard watching him go. The frost already climbing the fence posts, the sky pressing down gray and giving nothing away about what was coming. He had come on Friday. His boots were clean. He held a canvas bag with both hands and stood in the yard, the way children stood who had learned not to touch things until they were told they could. She showed him where to put the bag. She showed him where he would sleep. She asked if he was hungry, and he said yes, which was the first word he said to her. It was 3 days before he said a second one. He was not sullen. He was careful. There was a difference. She knew the difference because she had been careful herself for a long time, and careful looked nothing like sullen once you had lived next to both. He ate what she put in front of him. He cleared his own plate without being asked. At night, he went to bed when she told him to, and she did not hear anything from behind the curtain that divided the sleeping room. Not for the first week, not for the second. The third week, she woke at some hour past midnight to a sound she could not name at first. Not crying, not quite, but the breath doing something uneven on its way in. She lay still for a moment, listening, then got up. He was sitting on the edge of the cot with his hands flat on his knees, the way a person sat when they were waiting for something to pass. His eyes were open. "Bad one," she said. He nodded. She did not ask what the dream had been. She had learned, in her own bad years, that the content of the dream mattered less than the fact of being somewhere it could not follow. She sat on the foot of the cot. The rope springs took the new weight, and the boy shifted without thinking, making room without moving away. Outside, the wind worked under the eave in a long, low note. "My father's cough," he said after a while. "In the dream, it's still going." She did not say anything to that. There was nothing true to say to it that would help, and she had given up false things a while back. "It stopped," he said, "in real life. But in the dream it keeps going, and that's," he did not finish. "Worse," she said. "Yes." She pulled the blanket up from the foot of the cot and tucked it around his shoulders, the same way she tucked the loose corner of a finished seam. From habit, from the understanding that things left undone at the edges wore through first. "The wind's just the wind tonight," she said. "I know," he said, in a voice that meant he had known the whole time and had needed only to say the real thing out loud once to someone who would not try to fix it. She sat with him until the blanket stopped moving, with his breathing, and his hands had gone loose. Then she went and banked the stove, which did not need it, and lay awake listening to the same wind in the same eve, thinking that a cough, once you have listened for it through a wall, is not a sound that simply stops when the person stops. She did not finish the mittens until February. She had started them in December, a practical thing. The boy's hands were always cold. He did not complain about it, but she saw him pressing them against the stovetop when he thought she wasn't looking. She had wool left from a blanket project, and the needles were already out. She finished the first one in 2 evenings. She picked up the second one and set it down again and did not go back to it. It was not the knitting that stopped her. Knitting was simple. Her hands knew it, the way her hands knew the tension on a harness buckle, automatic, requiring nothing from the part of her that thought. It was the thought behind it. The way that finishing the second mitten was a kind of promise, that she was assuming the boy would still be here in February. Still needing both hands covered, that she was assuming spring, and the summer beyond it, and all the mornings between the one she was living in and the one that was still a long way off. She had not made promises like that in a while, not since the last time she had made them and found that the future was not obligated to honor what she had decided about it in advance. She left the second mitten in the basket on the shelf and went back to her work. And the boy wore one mitten and one wrapped hand through the coldest weeks of January, and he did not mention it. She noticed him not mentioning it. She said nothing about that either. She picked up the second mitten on a Sunday in early February, when a warm spell had come through, and the icicles off the eave were dripping loud onto the porch boards. She finished it in one sitting, while the boy sat across the table, working on his letters with a pencil gone short enough to be awkward. He looked up when she set the needles down. She turned the mitten right side out and checked the seam the way she checked all her work, not out of doubt, out of habit. "Here," she said, and set them both on the table between them. He looked at them. He picked up the new one and put it on to check the fit, then set it back beside its pair. He did not say thank you. He went back to his letters. She went back to her sewing. And the room kept on the way rooms do when the weather outside has decided to be ordinary for a little while. She had thought the hardest part would be town. She had been wrong, but she had not known that yet in January, when she brought him into the dry goods store on a Tuesday, and Mrs. Blythe, who ran the post counter, looked at him over her spectacles the way she looked at things she had already made up her mind about. "Isn't that the Kessler boy?" Not a question. The kind of sentence built to look like one so it could be denied later. She set her list on the counter. "He is. And you've had him since November." Mrs. Blythe said nothing for a moment, sorting through the mail with her fingers, each envelope making a small, flat sound. "His family know he's here?" "His father made the arrangement," said in the tone of a woman who was hearing the end of a thing instead of the middle. "His father, well." She did not look up from the counter. She had come for flour and thread and a new tin for coffee, and she meant to leave with all three. The boy stood beside her, close enough that his shoulder touched her sleeve, and she could feel the question in him, whether to move away, whether that would help, whether standing here was something he was allowed to do. She did not move. "Flour first," she said to Mrs. Blythe, and Mrs. Blythe went to get it, and the mail sat sorted and unmentioned. And when they walked out 15 minutes later with what they'd come for, the boy carried the flour without being asked and held the door open for her in a way that was not practiced. It was just the way he thought about doors now, about who was ahead and who was behind and what a person did about that. She said nothing about it. She loaded the wagon. On the road home, with the sky coming down pale and flat and the horses moving at the easy pace she let them keep on roads they knew, he said, "She doesn't like that I'm at your house." "No," she agreed. "Why?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about what was true and what was useful and where those two things overlapped, which was not always where she would have chosen. "Some people need things to be simple," she said. "You and I are not simple right now. Are we going to be?" She looked down the road at the line where the pale sky met the pale land. "Probably," she said. "Come spring." He accepted that the way he accepted most things, as information, as weather, as a thing to fold away and carry until it was needed. In March, when the thaw had turned the creek road to soup, and there was nothing to do about any of it but wait, Dr. Yates came again. He stood in the yard and told her what she had already understood. That the father had not made it through February, that the solicitor in Hayes had filed the guardianship document, and that the man's sister had been notified. "How long?" she said. "Weeks, maybe, depends on the roads." She nodded. "You're not worried," the doctor said. It was not quite a question. "I have his letter," she said, "and 2 witnesses whose names I recognize. She'll bring her own lawyer. She's welcome to bring whoever she likes." The doctor looked at her for a moment with the expression he sometimes wore when he was deciding whether to say something he had already decided to say. "You've done well with him," he said. "The boy. He seemed to search for the right word and settle for the simple one. He's steadier." She did not answer right away. She thought of the boy in November, holding the canvas bag with both hands. She thought of him in January, sitting at the edge of his cot, with his hands pressed flat on his knees. She thought of him in February, carrying the flour to the wagon and holding the door open without being told. "He did that himself," she said. "I just kept the stove going." The woman from Kansas City sat at her table with the lawyer beside her and the guardianship document laid out in front of her and the expression of someone who has been told the room is on fire and is trying to decide whether that changes the price of the house. Her name was Millicent. She had offered it at the door the way a person offers a credential rather than an introduction. And the name fit her, sharp-edged and decided, a name that expected to be heard and answered. The boy was in the barn. She had sent him there before the buggy stopped, not because she was afraid of what he might hear, but because some conversations were hers to have first. "This document," Millicent said, touching the letter without picking it up, "was written by a man who was unwell. It was witnessed by Dr. Yates and a justice of the peace from Hayes County, she said. Both of them can confirm his mind was sound. The lawyer opened his case. He produced papers. She had expected papers. She looked at them with the same attention she gave to harness orders, checking the measurements, checking the signatures, noting what was there and what was not. What was there was a claim of blood relation and an argument about the boy's welfare. What was not there was anything that outweighed what she held. He named me, she said, in writing. In front of witnesses, he had the right to name whoever he chose. He had a fever. The justice of the peace would not have signed if he believed that. Millicent's hands were flat on the table. She was a woman who had spent a long time being the person who decided things, and she was not finding the experience of sitting across from someone who did not appear to find her especially frightening to be a comfortable one. "You have no connection to this family," she said. "You have no legal standing beyond a piece of paper written by a dying man." "That piece of paper," she said, "carries the same standing as any document you've brought to this table. The difference is what it says." The lawyer leaned in and said something low to Millicent. Millicent's jaw moved. She looked at the letter again, at the signatures at the bottom, at the seal in the corner that she had not yet said anything about. Outside, she could hear the boy in the yard. He had come out of the barn without being told. He was doing something with the fence post he had been wanting to fix for 2 weeks. The one that leaned when the ground thawed. And the small sound of the mallet carried clear and ordinary through the window. Millicent heard it too. She looked toward the window. She looked at the woman across the table from her. She picked up her own papers and held them for a moment, the way a person holds something they have decided not to keep, and set them back down. "This isn't finished," she said. "No," she agreed, "but today it is." Millicent stood. The lawyer closed his case. She walked them to the door and watched the buggy turn in the yard, the polished harness catching the afternoon light for a moment before the road took them. The boy stopped hammering when the horses moved. He watched the buggy go down the road until it was small and then smaller. Then he picked up the mallet again. She stayed in the doorway until he had the post set plumb and stood back to look at it, his head tilted the way he tilted it when he was checking his own work. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at her. She nodded once. He went back to the mallet. She went back inside. April came the way. It came every year in that country, not announcing itself, just arriving, the same way the light came differently through the same window, and the mud in the yard began to hold boot prints instead of swallowing them. She was on the porch steps with a harness trace in her lap when the boy came out with his mug and sat down beside her. Not with the careful distance he had kept in November, that particular spacing of a child who had learned to take up exactly as much room as was offered and no more, but settled, easy, the way a person sat somewhere they had stopped deciding whether to be. The mittens were in the basket by the door. He did not need them today. He probably would not need them again until October, which was a long way off, which was the whole point. She worked the awl through the leather. The light came in low and clear the way April light did, sideways across the porch boards, catching the brass of the buckle, catching the fine hairs at the boy's temple, where he had turned to watch a hawk circle over the south field. She had not sent word to the solicitor yet about Millicent's visit. She would do that next week when she went to town for salt and the spring accounts. She would stop at Dr. Yates's office and at the courthouse and do what needed doing there in the plain light of the ordinary morning it would be, the same way she had done every hard thing in the past few years, without waiting for it to feel like less than it was. Down the road, past the gate whose hinge she had replaced in March, 2 horses moved along the fence line of the neighboring quarter section, their tails lifting in the same wind that moved the grass along the ditch. The boy watched them. "Are those the Callaway horses?" he said. "They were. They sold them last fall. I don't know whose they are now." He considered this. We could ask. We could. When we go to town. When we go to town. He went quiet again, easy with it, the way he had learned to be easy with silence over the winter. Not afraid of it. not trying to fill it, just letting it be what it was. She had not taught him that. He had come to it on his own. In the months of evenings they had spent on either side of the lamp with him, working at his letters, and her, working at her mending, and neither of them requiring the other to talk. She pulled the thread through, checked the tension, ran her thumb down the seam the way she always did, not because she doubted it, but because that was how she knew it was right. She set the trace in the basket beside the mittens. The boy leaned back on his hands on the step, his face turned up toward the sky, easy as a thing that has found its place and settled into it. Down the road, the two horses had gone around the bend, and the field was just field again, pale new grass and the last of the winter's cold bleeding into the ground, and the long, even light of a morning that did not need to be anything more than what it was. She did not move to go inside, not yet. The hawk was still there, still turning. The wind moved through the grass. The boy's breathing had gone slow, and even beside her, the particular evenness of someone who has stopped waiting for things to change and is simply somewhere, simply here, his weight settled against the step like a thing that had always fit in that spot, even before either of them had known to expect it.